Hello?
Hey, James.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm doing okay. First off, I want to say thank you for giving me more of your time. And again, I apologize about the previous interview and the errors I had with that.
No problem. Technology's finicky from time to time.
Yeah, it was really, when I have my recording interface plugged in, normally all audio has to go through that thing, and I didn't realize that Skype would still work with that. It just kind of, I guess, operates outside of whatever's set as the default and everything else. So I figured if I could hear you and you could hear me, it must have been recording, but I guess it wasn't. But,
oh well.
So, Benjamin George of Crypto.Press, which is your website.
Indeed.
And on your website, you have a ticker, which basically compares Bitcoin to all the other cryptocurrencies. And there's also news headlines. I was reading fascinating news headlines today on your website.
Yeah, there's wild stuff going around right now.
Yeah, there definitely really is. One that stood out to me is something we kind of talked about last time with the social media sites and trying to incorporate blockchain into those. So before we get into all the areas that blockchaining and cryptocurrencies are revolutionizing, do you want to just give us a brief overview of cryptocurrencies and blockchain for anyone who's unaware?
Sure. Let's see. I'll just start from the beginning.
Okay.
Blockchains are more or less a distributed kind of ledger, or another way to think about it is a database, where transactions can be put out there and verified by the software itself, and you don't have the need for a third party to go ahead and verify transactions. Currently, there's getting close to about 1,000 cryptocurrencies, with the first one and most prevalent, obviously, being Bitcoin. And today, it's expanding into just about every industry that you can imagine, which we talked about last time. I'm sure we'll get into here again pretty soon.
Yeah, just wrapped up the interview the other day and one earlier today talking about blockchaining being incorporated into the music industry and in multiple aspects of the music industry.
Yeah. Were you doing, you were talking about producing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a producer. So it interests me in the way that, people have been talking about using the blockchain for sort of a replacement to the copyright system, because you can have a certificate or a proof of kind of authenticity of your work through the blockchain. But they're also trying to use it to maximize revenue streams where, one guy's trying to start up a whole ecosystem that will basically be like, similar to IPOs, where you can monetize your Twitter following as a digital asset and things like that.
Right. There's a very interesting company that is called 21.co that is working heavily on Bitcoin development. They actually produced a little modified Raspberry Pi that mined Bitcoin so you could do microtransactions with them. And people were doing all sorts of really cool, interesting things, like selling their weather data from their little Raspberry Pi interfaces, and also, and the idea was that you could monetize even the smallest little calls for like programming. So if somebody wanted to use, say, something that you've programmed, they would include it in their program, and then everybody that used that program, it would automatically send just little microtransactions for each one of those little uses. And the developer would get paid on the backside without anybody being aware that there was a transaction happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the mindset behind one of the projects a person is working on, as far as with YouTube and Spotify and the different streaming sites. I think they're looking to implement another network behind it where it'll be like that, where they'll get another microtransaction based off the blockchain for, say, a YouTube view or streaming a song on Spotify or something.
Right, and I think I read probably about a week ago, Twitch just reintroduced Bitcoin payments on their website.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that's kind of, and they have a system where you can send money to them, or you can actually send a direct Bitcoin transaction through Twitch to the person's address that can be listed in their profile.
Yeah, more and more. I remember a few years ago seeing a lot of retailers even starting to incorporate it into their websites. I mean, because there was a big news thing when someone bought like $1 million car or something in Bitcoin, and I
Right.
think that's
I
when
remember that.
that's when a lot of the businesses were they figured they're losing out. You know, they might as well take the currency if people are buying and trading with it.
Right. Well, you know, the value has actually been pretty consistent over the past couple years. I mean, it hasn't really had any huge plunges, but it's definitely gone on a nice trend up.
Yeah, I was saying in the interview I just wrapped up, it's really interesting how we've kind of gone full circle where, you know, we used to have money that was backed by gold, that had an intrinsic value because of the gold. Then we went to these paper currencies, fiat money. Now it's all in computers, you know, debit cards and credit cards. But now it's like full circle where it is a digital cryptocurrency, but it's more like gold in having intrinsic value and stuff. And even as we had said before, the linguistics of it, you know, referring to it as mining the coins rather than issuing a currency. Hey, sorry
Hey,
about that. I wanted to switch the network I was on and see if that helps it at all. I have
oh,
like
no problem.
I have the Wi-Fi and then I have an extender box, and sometimes the one network works better than the other. So hopefully this will clear up the problems.
Okay.
But what were you saying right before we got cut off?
I was just saying that Bitcoin is actually turning into, or is an incredible store of value, on par with gold on a lot of different levels. I mean, it's not its only utility, of course, but uh, if you've kind of watched over the past few years, is the financial markets in any of the large countries have taken tumbles, Bitcoin has either stayed pretty much steady or gained.
Yeah. Well, I remember
So it's pretty.
hearing at one point that you know, some of your top finance people were kind of starting to look to it as a safe haven, because if you pay attention to any of the people who know stuff about the monetary systems and stuff, I mean, basically they've been saying for years now that at any point it could all just fall apart.
Right, and with negative interest rates coming, it's going to be an interesting scenario how people are going to interpret that and what their response is going to be. Because I don't think people are going to be too happy about leaving their money in the bank and then having a little bit less.
Yeah. Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, it's a crazy concept. There used to be the idea you put money in the bank and it gained wealth, and now it's like you put your money in a bank and it's going to cost you to keep your money with them.
Right.
I think people have slowly been introduced to this idea, though, with the idea of like prepaid cards and stuff, like the you know, the reloadable debit
Yeah.
cards and everything like that. It's mainly going to be the older middle class generation that's going to be like, what the hell's going on here? Why am I losing money by letting you guys hang on to my money? You might end up
Right. I think, you know, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you might end up seeing a return to people keeping cash under their mattress and
Right.
stuff like that.
Well, I think there's a big problem still because in order to really utilize Bitcoin the way you should, which is running your own node and having it secure, and there's a really steep learning curve of knowledge to really accomplish all of that.
Yeah.
So until that gets pretty much what they call grandma friendly, um, it's going to be kind of an uphill battle for adoption for a little bit. But you know, with so many different people working on it, it's simply a matter of time. I mean, remember the internet back in the day?
Yeah.
Oh, darn.
Huh?
It seems like we have a delay.
Yeah. It keeps kind of going in and out. But yeah, you're right about the internet back in the day and everything. You know, it was always kind of older generations. It took them a little bit to get privy to it. I always think though the term grandma friendly. It's funny when it would come with when my grandmother was alive and around. She could hook up a printer and figure out all that stuff. And like the printers were the one aspect of the technology where I was like, I can't figure it out. I don't know what's going on here. Even nowadays, I can't set up the Wi-Fi for the printer if my life depended on it.
Well, my grandfather was actually a database developer.
Uh-huh.
So, the term is kind of relative, I suppose.
Yeah.
But there still is a pretty steep uphill battle in terms of ease of use for the common person, because, you don't want people to invest.
Hey, I
Hey,
almost wonder how much of this problem is actually Skype as opposed to us, because I know my app for it in general seems to be acting a little screwy outside of the connection and stuff.
it certainly could be Skype.
But, okay, so again, as we were saying, people are hesitant about investing their life savings into cryptocurrencies and stuff thus far.
Right, and I think people should maintain that level of hesitancy, simply because to invoke really good security, or at least pretty good security, for your Bitcoin savings, I mean, it's pretty technical still.
Yeah.
Especially if you want it to be extremely secure, if you're worried about, state level actors being somehow involved at some point in the Bitcoin atmosphere, then, that is even a greater level of complexity. So I think there's a good cause to have that hesitancy still.
Well, there's even the saying in digital media, your stuff isn't backed up unless if it's backed up on 3 different sources or, 3 different flash drives and stuff like that. And I think that's a good way to look at it even in general, especially in a day and age of, where you have bank runs and stuff like that, or whatever they call it in Europe, the bank holidays and stuff. It's like you might as well, it's diversifying your portfolio and all that stuff. You might as well have a little bit of, physical gold, a cryptocurrency, a checking account. You should have as many eggs in as many baskets as you can.
Absolutely.
I think that's always a safe way to go about it.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. I was going to say, one of the articles on the site, and we had mentioned the stuff before that I thought was really interesting because it's one of the parts of the internet so many people use, is is Facebook about to get MySpaced by the next gen social media? And it goes into what we were talking about before with the ideas of blockchain being introduced into social media. STEEMIT, it said, is soaring up 10% at this rate and stuff. So do you want to get into the advantages of having your social network on a blockchain as opposed to the standard ones?
Sure. I think the biggest advantage is, if you look at Twitter, they just censored 250,000 accounts or something like that.
Really? I didn't know about that, but I know it's going on left and right over there.
And that's becoming kind of common policy, especially with just the state of the world as it is.
Yeah.
And so when you have a blockchain, and it can be a good and a bad thing too, because you can't get rid of propaganda, but at the same time nobody can take down valuable information.
Yeah.
And that's where the biggest probably value add is going to come, is that there's no central authority that can say, well, we don't want this posted. People will be able to say, well, I don't want to view this, and everybody's always had that option. But no one will be able to go down. The United States government or any other government won't be able to hold anybody and say, you have to take this down, otherwise we're going to prosecute you.
Well, that's what
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that's what I liked about the format STEEMIT was trying to do, because I watched a video with Luke from We Are Change explaining it basically, and it's like there's the monetary incentive to not post bullshit basically, because it could end up costing you if you end up posting something and it gets enough downvotes, or you're stealing content and everything like that.
Right, and they're working really hard on their reputation system to try and create a fair economy around that.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty challenging task in and of itself.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really didn't like about Facebook as far as like my music stuff goes and everything is, you know, it was a good tool as far as promotion for a while, and then the moment they introduced the sponsored ads and everything, all of a sudden it would be like your post was seen by 10 people when you have 1,000 fans, and it's like, do you want to pay us to show it to the rest of them? And it's like, what is this doing for me? Like, you guys are basically holding me hostage.
Yeah, they've gone through. I remember Facebook when you had to have a university account,
Yeah,
to get a page. And ever since then, they've transitioned into just hoarding information and then trying to monetize that information.
yeah.
And they've done a pretty good job. I mean, admittedly, but at the same time, it's definitely becoming outdated in terms of what people use it for and how often they use it.
Yeah. I think most people at this point, I know as far as me personally, the only thing I really use it for is like the chat option. Like there are a handful of people I talk to on there, and that's just the easiest way to contact them.
Yeah. I hardly ever use it anymore. I have a few pages that I maintain, and that's why I maintain that account. But I mean, I don't like having too many accounts out there. It becomes, cringeworthy when you go back and you find your MySpace account or your GeoCities account.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, I know. It's so funny because, if you ever Google yourself or anything like that, then you even have other pages that have like consolidated all of that cringeworthy, outdated social network stuff, and it's like, and it's so funny because some of it will be like, oh, this person, good friends with this person, and it'll be like an ex-girlfriend you haven't dated in like a decade or something, and it's like, for someone who doesn't know you, if they were to come across it, they're going to end up with a completely, outdated perspective of who you are.
Right. And, interestingly, I think the blockchain could probably provide a solution for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when you have an immutable record out there, then you at least know that record has some sort of trustworthiness to it, especially if you had some way of people to basically sign the record and say, yeah, this guy is this guy, or, this girl is this girl. And if you got enough of those signatures, you could pretty much, if you did it the right way, you could verify identity.
Yeah.
And if you did that, well, with identity verification on the blockchain, then all of that becomes a very interesting game because, what goes out there will pretty much stay out there. You can't delete it. So then it becomes a privacy issue, but it also allows the ability for everything to be privatized and orderly. So, double-edged sword.
Yeah, but I think it'd be better for, the idea of people verifying other people, especially if you think in terms of like Twitter and how they have the verified accounts or, things like that. Better it be done by the rest of the community rather than some centralized force just sort of decreeing that this is the official, account of whoever. It always seemed very odd to me that Twitter do that. But I guess if you're like Taylor Swift or something, it makes sense.
Yeah, especially when people monetize their brand name as themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're like a corporation or a, Beyonce is a brand, basically. I try to
Right.
tell people that, and they don't want to hear it. Where I'm like, you have to realize when you're talking about these people, it's not Beyonce Knowles, it's Beyonce Incorporated. It's like everything that is that product.
Right. The person becomes the product.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, it makes people successful, but it also is a pretty interesting lifestyle as well.
Yeah,
But
definitely is.
I wanted to mention something on the signing part. In the cryptographic community, there's what's called signing parties, because people have what's called P key. It's a good way to verify your identity. Online, if you sign your key and other people have that key saved and they know it's you, then they can verify that it came from you. And so what people do is they go and they meet people in person and then sign their keys, and so that enough people sign them and they can verify, because enough people have met a single individual in person, that person indeed is who they say they are. And so that's happening out in the cryptographic community today. It happens at pretty much all of the big events.
Where I'm trying to, think of what we talked about last time and everything, and what would be good points to reiterate. Where do you think the biggest, revolutions in this area and the blockchaining and crypto community are at right now? I mean, would you consider the social networking aspect to be one, or you think that's just sort of a byproduct of everything else that can come from this?
I think, we definitely have a need for communication as a global growing community. And social networking has been a great way to facilitate that need of communication. So I think there's definitely, the blockchain facilitating social media is going to be a large thing, but ultimately I see social media or blockchain technology kind of being an underlying layer for just about any sort of service industry, and also most companies. If you think about it in terms of a company, you can issue stock essentially as a cryptocurrency, manage all of the dividends, all of the profit, all of the accounting, everything like that in one centralized ledger. And then you could have smart contracts pay all of your shareholders and all of your investors, and all of that could be handled automatically, and it could be done even in real time if you really wanted to, or near real time. And then, so I think the real value is going to be the support layers that all of the blockchain ends up supporting.
Yeah, it sort of seems like, as far as technology goes, again, I think we mentioned this last time, I was born in '86, so I remember DOS and dial-up and everything like that. And it seems like the past 30 years we've been kind of fumbling around with technology, figuring out what we can do with it, what we can't, and everything. And now it seems like we're finally at the point where it's like, like they talked about the dot-com bubble, and, I don't think the tech revolution has happened. I think we're at the cusp of it, like right now, with all of these things, where it's like,
oh, absolutely.
Okay, now we know what we can do. Now let's do it.
Well, we have a vague idea still. Think about we have fusion reactors that have been running for upwards of 30 seconds now across the world. If we could turn one of those on and start generating some net positive energy output, well, all of a sudden, all of the technology that we use takes a whole nother magnitude of usefulness, because now we can power all sorts of stuff at relatively no cost.
Yeah.
And yeah, so in terms of the tech revolution beginning, I don't think I think we're very, very at the beginning of it.
Yeah. And I think it's got a long way to go still, which it's, mind-boggling to think about. I think we left off on this sentiment last time, actually, that this is an extremely exciting time to be alive.
Indeed.
You have the double-edged sword of revolution on both sides, you know, going into a new kind of world, new lifestyles, new environments, but the uncomfortability of seeing what everyone's used to kind of crumble away.
Right, and then all the displacement that happens because of that.
Yeah. I wonder, you know, even in terms of the upcoming American elections, I know there's been concerns over voter fraud and things like that. I would be interested to see if blockchain can offer a solution, you know, because a handful of the phrases I hear in terms of it are authenticity and things like that. So I wonder if eventually we're going to have elections running off some sort of blockchain.
There's a lot of people working on that. I'm actually working on a voting mechanism for the press token that I'm developing.
Mm-hmm.
And but mine's more of a kind of a balance between a representation of investment and also of interest. So it's more of a balance, not a one person, one vote. But yeah, blockchain technology is certainly an exceptional tool for a voting channel because you can make it. It's an immutable record for one. Like if you use the Bitcoin blockchain, which is the most secure blockchain that we have out there right now, the cost of actually going in and committing voter fraud would be exceptionally high, and so it would basically make it not a feasible option. So yeah, but I don't think you would get a government to adopt that anytime soon.
Yeah, no, not at this rate.
No.
But so what projects are you working on in terms of all of this?
Well, my foremost project right now is Crypto.Press, which is an information portal, as we were talking about, and it's currently getting a rewrite. It'll be pulling in probably about 400 different coins from 5 different exchanges and about 1,500 different news sources to kind of create all of that information in a single source, and that'll be launching probably in about a week and a half.
Okay.
Currently, it's only doing about 100 coins in 2 exchanges, but it does run 24/7, and it's pulling in information from about 800 news sources, so it has some utility to it. And then my next project is Blockshift.trade, which is an instantaneous cryptocurrency converter. It's not live yet. It's in the testing phase, but when it's live, it'll be able to convert any currency to another cryptocurrency without registration, no need for an email. It'll just be a simple one-page form that you fill out, send a deposit, and then you receive your coins. And then eventually that'll expand into accepting USD through things like Western Union, MoneyGram, and also other currencies, wherever it's accepted. And then finally, I'm also working on Crypto.xyz, which is a community forums for the crypto community at large, and is also working as the discussion layer for Crypto.Press. And it's a free forum that anybody can register on. It's going to be really low moderation. It's not about censorship. It's just about information.
Yeah.
But so that pretty much keeps me busy for about 16 hours a day.
And I know last time we had discussed, just sort of the personal background information, your time spent in South America and stuff. So you want to get into that? What drew you into all of the cryptocurrency technology stuff?
Sure.
Is this your main profession, or is this side job stuff, or?
Well, currently it's my main profession. I started 2 years ago just building trading robots, and then I really saw the need for an unbiased information source, which is really hard to come by these days.
Yeah.
So I had the idea that in order to create something semi-unbiased, you just throw in all the information sources, and you let the user determine what should be the message. And so that's how Crypto.Press was born. And then I've come to realize just how valuable blockchain technology is going to be for the world. And so I've really expanded and work full time now in that arena. But before that, I was traveling around Central and South America, doing luxury fishing charters and freelance developing for a while. But I've been an entrepreneur since I was 16 when I started my first web design business.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of been doing this off and on for a long time. I first heard about Bitcoin back in 2000. I think it was 11.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of didn't get into it because I was a little bit busy having fun. And now I'm full-time into it because, well, it's an incredible value, an incredible system, and it should be a really exciting ride.
Yeah, you want to explain what's going on with the mining process and stuff? As we had said before, I know when it first started, I saw all the stuff about Raspberry Pis and people kind of having their own little mining setups, but since then it's kind of gone into more of a industrious fashion with bigger setups and stuff.
Yeah, when Bitcoin first started, you could have your home PC mine Bitcoin, and you would have a chance of getting it. And then pools were introduced where people would pool all of their computers together to try and find the next block in the blockchain to mine Bitcoin. And then it was people that would use their graphics processors, and then that kind of transitioned into what's called an ASIC chip, which is basically just it's a chip that's manufactured specifically just to run the Bitcoin hashing algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's, in order to really get involved as a miner, you would have to purchase a really significant amount of equipment. There's a few places online that do what's called cloud mining, but there's also been the vast majority of those that have popped up end up being scams as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so there is a bit of a disconnect between your average person who's interested in Bitcoin and then having the ability to interact with the mining side of it, simply because of the cost. And there's a lot of talk about how that'll unfold in the future, what sort of solutions can be done about that. But there's also other cryptocurrencies that implemented solutions themselves, and they're more egalitarian and use different algorithms that won't allow you to build an ASIC chip, for instance, so you won't have that industrialization factor.
All right, and where, I know I asked this last time too, where do you, if you had to rank, say, top 3 areas where blockchaining is revolutionizing industries, what would you have to say they are?
Well, certainly you have Bitcoin, which is the leader,
Mm-hmm.
and they've revolutionized a bit how all of this works together. They've pioneered a lot of different tools on the cryptography and communications, and they have a very decent amount of funding to continue to develop it. And there's multiple teams out there actually developing for Bitcoin because it is open source. Anybody can develop it if they want to by themselves or join other teams. All of these are pretty much. Ethereum is a very interesting concept, and they are heavily riding on what are called smart contracts, which allow for people to do all sorts of very interesting things on utilizing the blockchain. And then I'd say probably the other one is the cloud storage utilizing blockchain. There's a few companies working on that. There's MadeSafe, there's SiaCoin, and there's StoreJ. And those are, they all have kind of unique approaches, but they're all integrating the blockchain with cloud technology, and it's pretty interesting stuff. And those are pretty near market. A couple open betas, I believe.
Now, I know that though, last time when we mentioned that, I believe you had said that there's kind of a downside to that, though, where right now it still works out better to have it on servers and stuff.
Well,
am I right?
Right, and the downside certainly comes from the cost and also the amount of, it's still beta.
Yeah.
So a lot of these, you don't want to put any business critical information, for instance, out there. So there's still a lot of development to the technology to happen. But the cost side of it is because when you have just a box in a room, that box only has to have access to the computers in the building, for instance. When you have a blockchain, you have to communicate with the blockchain, which is multiple computers all around the world. So it becomes much more of an overhead in terms of communication, electricity use, storage space, things like that, in order to facilitate that. But at the same time, you don't have anybody who can go off and, for instance, seize your data, or so far, no one's been able to hack a blockchain directly, so no one would be able to hack and steal your data off the blockchain, which is probably the biggest downfall of cloud storage currently. And you can hear about iCloud getting hacked all the time.
Yeah. I know we had mentioned earlier how it's not, grandma friendly, but I don't know if you saw this headline on your website, actually. It's about a mobile game that is teaching people about Bitcoin. So, with things like that, you see attempts at trying to get it where people can learn about it, hopefully in a fun manner.
Oh yeah, what I think is going to be the evolution. You're going to have a lot of people working on apps like that to get more people involved, more technical sided people, and then eventually you're going to have an app that just makes it really, really easy, but it's really secure, and it's a matter of 3 buttons and taking pictures of QR codes for people.
Yeah.
And that's all they have to worry about, and and not losing their device, obviously.
A kind of off.
But I think we're still.
You can finish.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to bring up something kind of off topic, so finish your point first.
I kind of forgot.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I was going to ask, the idea of the game thing made me think, are you aware of the Chinese Sesame credit system? I just figured I'd ask if you're aware of it, if you have any opinions on that, and the sort of gamification of life you see going on.
I've heard about it. I haven't read much about it. But the gamification of life is happening. I mean, just look at all the people walking around playing Pokemon Go.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's, as far as Google goes, I've heard that their MO with that is, it's similar to Facebook, where they profit from the data they're getting.
Exactly.
So they're genius for them.
Oh yeah, I read that you can, as a business, advertise on there as a Poke Gym or whatever, and a point of reference of interest, and the amount of foot traffic that people were getting because they did that was just incredible. And I think how that's going to evolve is you're going to have augmented reality.
Yeah.
With all of these things, and it's going to become more and more of a, that's going to become more and more of a daily. People are going to be walking down the street and they'll have 7 different games that are running through their augmented reality sunglasses, and something will pop behind the trash can and they'll have to go run and get it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely where it's going. I've seen Microsoft, that's what they're working on, where everyone else, is going into VR and they want to go into augmented and stuff. I saw like a thing where I don't know what sort of setup you'd have for this. I imagine you need a couple projectors, but it will basically be like you'll be playing a video game, or like you said, sunglasses. You'll just have something where it's in your vision, but it was like, a shooting game and the things were popping up in your room somewhere and stuff.
Right.
But yeah, that's definitely where it's going.
And the technology is actually already pretty close to there.
Yeah. Well, especially with the Sesame credit things, and that's like you said, you had seen a little bit about it. It's basically how the Chinese government is linked in with their version of Amazon, basically, and they're monitoring everyone's social networks. You post a certain thing, post a song or something, you get these little points for everything you do, what products you buy and stuff like that, and you can get rewards through it and all sorts of stuff. But it's a lot of your data being sucked up by a government to make it all happen.
Right. Or a huge entity.
Yeah. Yeah, there might be
Yeah.
some corporation above the government at this rate.
Well, everybody owes somebody favors. It's pretty common in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, the gamification of things is pretty. It's interesting because I think it's kind of it detaches people from reality a little bit, so they don't feel as emotionally attached to all of these things, which it's probably a bad thing in the long run, but who am I to say?
Yeah, I watched a whole presentation on it actually, and the guy was like talking about it and, you know, was saying all sorts of things, how, you know, people would have different things going on, be comparing what ads are being advertised on their shirts, you know, talking in terms of all the future technology. And then he tried to close it up with the point being like, you know, if all this information is out there, then maybe we'll make better decisions and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, that's like the biggest Big Brother selling point you could have came up with. Like, it really just makes it like, you know, double-edged sword of technology again, where it's like, oh yeah, you know, we're going to incentivize everyone to have a better lifestyle because they're going to have, you know, these peering eyes on their every move.
Right. Yeah, I think that's patently absurd. And I don't think that's ever the case, that just because there's more information out there, people make better decisions.
No, not at all.
I think Facebook is probably a nice little study for that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it amazes me how people, you know, I'd seen it. I had a friend of mine tell me once that the computer runs on your soul, and I kind of laughed it off at first, and then I thought about it, and I was like, well, I guess it kind of does. You know, I sit at the computer, I make music, someone else sits at one, they could make a movie. It's very, you know, the tool is very much controlled by the person in front of it in that regards. And then you see some of the things that people occupy themselves with, you know, on Facebook and everything like that, and it's like, it just sort of seems to degenerate people, I feel like.
I think any useful tool always has the ability to, you know, create greatness as well as very it's equal and opposite on the other side.
Yeah. What sort of,
imagine somewhere.
just because I'm seeing things on the site and thinking, what sort of opportunities does Bitcoin and the rise of all of these new cryptocurrencies sort of offer towards startups? Because I know I would kind of think if we're having all these new currencies and new forms of trade, then hopefully it would lead to more innovation that, say, banks would be reluctant to invest in and stuff.
Well, it's really nice for startups because people are able to run their own crowd sales.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a lot of very, very, very successful crowd sales that have funded development for, you know, 10 years, 15 years for some of these projects. So I think in that atmosphere, it's great, because in order to fund these, all you have to do is be anybody and send it to a random Bitcoin address or another cryptocurrency, and you've now joined that development group and donated to them, and now are a part of that community. And, you know, all of these development communities all have their different Slack channels and Telegram channels, and everybody's very friendly and communicative.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to startups, I think it's kind of unprecedented, the ability that it gives you to raise funds and also manage business, really, because if you utilize it correctly, now you can cut a whole bunch of costs that are traditional for a business, you know, payrolls and all sorts of different accounting aspects, and you can streamline all of those early business items pretty easily with, you know, some of the blockchains that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And from a startup perspective, I think it'll probably revolutionize that atmosphere or that community. or those communities, rather.
Well, and at this rate, you know, if it's going to be integrated into everything, there's going to end up being a whole new kind of sector of the tech industry that will come out of this, because, you know, you're going to need someone to, like you used the example of payroll, you're going to need to send someone around to sort of update everyone's system and then teach everyone how it's working. And so it will streamline on one end, but hopefully it will open up new opportunities for others.
It certainly will. It's already, I mean, I think there's a couple of different Reddit sites where people advertise their services and what they need and pay in cryptocurrencies.
Mm-hmm.
There's all sorts of different job sites popping up doing the same thing. And then, you know, a lot of people, you see them posting for developers who work with the actual coding behind a lot of these cryptocurrencies, because a lot of them are building their own frameworks on how to interface with the cryptocurrency and the blockchain itself. And so it's a whole separate programming language that people are learning, and that's created a whole, like for Ethereum, for instance, one of their main programming languages is Solidity, and there's a very, very desperate drive for developers who are capable with that language, because one, it's so new, but two, because it's so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're going to see a huge explosion with those job markets, for sure.
Yeah, and hopefully, I know I've been seeing things about colleges lately have kind of gone astray, so I really hope that the sort of way people work themselves into those careers will be outside of the classical education models and sort of also be part of the new technological revolution. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more free education options kind of popping up.
Right. I know there's a few people working on education on the blockchain, so where you can actually take a course, for instance, and then whoever wrote that course would then benefit, because you sent X amount of Bitcoin to have access to the course, for instance, to get the decryption key, and then you have all the information and you can learn about it. And I believe that's that'll be where people start digesting the vast amount of technical information when it comes to things like this.
Is there any area as far as sector of the economy that you think Bitcoin and blockchaining has nothing to offer to, or is it pretty much, its applications are pretty much open?
I mean, if you think about wherever there's a computer using a database, which is probably the vast majority of your business out there, then there's probably some form of application that blockchain will probably be able to facilitate a need better than currently exists.
Well, didn't you mention like healthcare last time? That they're trying to incorporate it into the healthcare industries?
Oh, absolutely. That, for instance, patient records is a huge problem in the healthcare industry, because all it takes is one bad patient record and you give the wrong treatment, and it's a whole world of problems.
Yeah.
And if you can create an immutable record that nobody can just go accidentally hit delete on, or accidentally add something to, because you can go back through the history of the entire record and see every single step of the record as it was added, then you pretty much eliminate that problem. So in terms of patient care, it can add a huge value.
I almost wonder, the other technological option we hear being proposed for problems like that is the implantable microchips and everything like that. And I sort of hope that this will provide an option where we're not going in that direction. Something about the whole transhumanist stuff kind of turns me off, where I enjoy technology, but I don't feel like being technology yet.
Yeah, I don't think I'm signing up for the cyborg transformation just quite yet. But in terms of that, there's a big push towards biometrics.
Yeah.
I really, that's, when it comes to security, biometrics is not the way to go, in my opinion. So I think that'll probably be what ends up happening. You know, there'll be retinal scanners, and they'll just take a retinal scan, and then that'll pull up your information from the blockchain. But I could imagine people will probably put it into a computer chip, especially for like pets, for instance.
Yeah.
Imagine if you could scan a pet's tag and then it pulled up exactly the owner on your Google Maps.
Yeah. I mean, given that ability to the common person, I mean, that's basically what they claim they do now with the chips, but you don't have many people with the actual devices to get to it.
Specialized equipment.
Yeah. Scary times, very exciting times, but little bit, you know, like we said, there's a nervousness in seeing the old ways sort of torn down. Well, I'm kind of out of questions for now, mainly because all the personal ones we answered the first time around, so I can't really remember them, unfortunately. Is there anything specific you'd like to cover? Anything you think would be important to educate people about or to highlight as far as going on with this stuff?
I think probably the biggest thing that anybody getting involved into this current situation, they really should always take a big look at security before they just go jump in and start trading or buying Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. Because the last thing you want to do is get involved a little bit, then get involved a little bit more, then get involved a little bit more, and then all of a sudden you're really involved, and yet you didn't take the time to set it up properly, and you lose all of that.
Yeah.
And that does happen. And it's sad when it happens. So definitely anybody who wants to get involved, take the time to educate yourself on how to get involved properly, set up a secure wallet, how to back up your wallet, you know, research hardware wallets, and definitely, you know, take your time.
Yeah. I mean, I think I remember at one point people would keep their wallets on like thumb drives or something like that. I could be wrong about that, but
yeah, you can keep your backup on a thumb drive. You can restore your backup file to any different wallet software, typically if they're compatible. And then you can go ahead and send your coins off to wherever you need. But the problem with, again, flash drives is usually those are the lower the quality of the manufacturing process, and they do go bad pretty often. So multiple backups is always, you know, like we said earlier.
Yeah. Try to get it 3 times or so.
Definitely.
I see another thing on your site about blockchaining in regards to diplomatic passports. Again, that's interesting, you know, it's as far as, you know, certifications and making sure someone is who they say they are. It's amazing how many areas, just in a quick scroll of your website, you know, how many areas you see this stuff going on in.
Yeah, it's pretty wild already, and I think it's just going to spread everywhere.
Yeah.
There's so much utility and efficiency and cost savings to be had that, you know, just like the Industrial Revolution, you had people who were still doing things by hand, but they didn't last too long because the machines were able to do it 50 times faster, 24 hours a day.
Is there any concern? I remember at one point there was concern with the Bitcoins and stuff. Everyone thought the governments were going to come down on them for, like, you know, money forging, basically. Has that fear kind of subsided?
Well, I think a little bit, just because you have such a big investment coming in from the private sector, and you also have the fact that it's distributed globally. So in order to ban it, I mean, you can't really ban it because you would have to shut it down across the entirety of the globe, and that's just pretty impractical. So I think from a regulation standpoint, most governments are still looking at it and trying to figure out their place with it. I mean, you got China, who's talking about doing a state cryptocurrency. Russia's talking about a state cryptocurrency. Ecuador is. So you have a lot of interest, and I think they see the value too, because you don't have all of the fraud with the fiat currencies.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about all the overhead for the materials and the printing and all of the locations and structures and machinery. So yeah, I think it's probably in their best interest to embrace the technology. Otherwise, you become outdated pretty quick.
Yeah, that's the risk they run. And I was seeing a headline again on the site about China having basically their version of Google censor search results related to Bitcoin. But that kind of makes sense if they're looking to introduce their own, that they would be kind of trying to secure and monopolize, make it where the one's getting less publicity than the other and stuff.
Right. The only problem when they do that, though, is now you have a private blockchain, most likely. And
yeah.
A private blockchain becomes inherently insecure just because
centralized authority, basically.
Right. And you have a whole bunch of points of failure in that system that you just don't have when you have a distributed blockchain. So there's a lot of... It should be a very interesting evolution, for sure.
Yeah, and hopefully people just, the easiest way to keep the negative incidents from happening is to understand, the fundamentals of it, where centralization is bad. We've learned this over, many societies rising and falling and collapsing, that the more centralized, the less, it's very... sort of back to the American revolutionary ideas of checks and balances and no one having too much power, but everyone having enough empowerment to do what they need to do.
Right.
So, all right.
Right. Great.
No, if you had something else to add, go for it.
No, I was good.
All right. Well, I was going to say, I'm pretty much all finished up as far as anything I could think of. So if you don't have anything else to add, we can call it a wrap for the day.
Yeah, sounds good, James. I think that was pretty good.
Okay. And if at any point you have updates, more stuff going on, when your site's revamped, the new projects come out, feel free to get in touch with me so we can cover them and do some updates and stuff.
Absolutely, will do. Thanks again, James.
All right, yeah, thank you. And I'll talk to you later.
All right, have a good one.
You too. Take care.
Bye.